Hi, I'm going to do a slightly longer than normal video today. Um, I'll keep it as brief as I can, and I will put some links in when I'm cross-referencing to other videos where we've done things in the past that I'm referring to during this, because this video is about producing an audit trail, which is a requirement in many academic institutions, and even reviewers are becoming more and more picky about audit trails. Showing your processes, showing your workings, how you arrived at these findings. Um, Because all of these methods, whether you're doing reflexive thematic analysis, IPA, grounded theory, framework analysis, the list just goes on. All of them involve stages and processes, and there's always guidelines in literature of these stages and processes, and usually it's anything between 3 and 6 stages and processes. So by simply making them transparent, it's one of the advantages of using a tool like NVivo. You can then demonstrate your processes clearly as appendices. They don't even add to your word count in your methodology chapter, and therefore gain some of that credibility. Because if I'm your reviewer or your extern or your panel or even your supervisor, often I don't have your data. So the only way I can make a value judgment as to the veracity of this piece of research is by looking at your processes, not your outcomes. As an external reviewer myself, I wouldn't even read your findings if you hadn't convinced me in the methodology chapter they were worth reading in the first place. And that you would do that through the audit trail. So arguably the audit trail is the most important criterion on which the trustworthiness and plausibility of a study can be affirmed. So we previously did a video, we did two actually, showing the processes and how they'd be managed in NVivo for reflexive thematic analysis and IPA. We did both of them because they're extremely popular, and a lot of the people that we're trained would be using those methods. Not exclusively, there's lots of methods, but they're popular, so we use those. And I'll have a link to the video before, but so we're not going to go over the contents of that video. You can look at how it was done on the other video. But as you would see, if you were doing, and we're using RTA today, reflexive thematic analysis, because it is probably, it's very widely used. That 06 paper, I think it's one of the most cited methodology papers in the world. So it's very popular. And in that video, we'd have shown how you would set up the 6 stages for the most up-to-date references that Braun-Clarke, should I say, will recommend. These are the stages in progress. They haven't really changed since 06. They slightly renamed them, I think, in 2020 or 2021 when they did a paper called One Size Fits All, which is kind of 20 things never to say to a student, because people do pass on unintentionally, often with the best of intention, but they do say things to students that are ill-informed, let's say, about the method itself. So following that video where we showed the 6 stages and processes and how you would apply a thematic analysis in NVivo, or reflexive thematic analysis in particular, we're going to follow that up with this one, which is showing you how you would show an audit trail of that. So bar this document that's open in front of me here, we'll be starting at the end today. I'm going to show you the finished output, and then there wouldn't be time to demonstrate each of those and how they were created, but we'll do that in any event in terms of putting you into links where these things are demonstrated. So I've two documents in here that I put in as PDFs, just so I want to keep the formatting a bit better than the memos in NVivo, which is kind of raw text. So I've an audit trail and an analytical strategy for this study. Now, the analytical strategy for this study would be the first document we would produce in many studies that we would be involved with on the consultancy side, because it's a decision that should be made to set up your project and to set it up in a manner commensurate with the method you're about to apply. So we would encourage people to write the data analysis section of their methodology chapter now rather than at the end, and then apply those. And they have a template and they can negotiate with their supervisor, etc., or whoever's in their funder, whoever they're responsible to, the PI. So it's a good idea to document the processes, because that's going to force a couple of decisions by creating that strategy memo. First, you're going to have to decide what your method is. What am I doing? Then you're going to have to read the authors, the seminal authors, in this case being Braun and Clarke, on the processes and how they recommend you approach this work. And then you document it. Now, if I can document it, it means I understand it. I've actually had to go and read Brown and Clarke. I've, in my own training, come across many times where people have cited Brown and Clarke, and I know from the conversation they haven't read it. So go and read the paper and then document it. And if you can document it, then you can explain it, you understand it, and you can then, defend it. So the structure of this document would be, we'd start out with a little bit about the methodology, who are Brown and Clarke drawing on, the characteristics defining, some more generic elements to it, the characteristics defining qualitative research, an overview of the processes, and then get into the stages and processes for that particular method. And you'll find that they will be named similarly, but if you're talking about within phenomenology, for example, then they're going to be simple. By the way, this project file will be available on a download link. You will have to request it because we don't want to just put it out there, but it will be available if somebody wants it. As with any of the other bits and pieces we're going to show you and how we constructed this audit trail. I would recommend self-auditing, checking that you're not imposing your worldview over your participants. I mean, Ron and Clarke talk about phase 6, writing the report. I think you could break that into other components where, creating the report really has a set of processes within it. It's your analysis and write-up. It's the summation of everything that you've been doing up to now and putting it together in a document. So I would say, there are various types of questions you would ask of the data during analysis. I would then self-audit to check that I'm not imposing my worldview over my participants, that the claims I'm making from our participants are supported by the data. And I would also we would systematically review the themes and then synthesize using analytical memos and then synthesize them into a coherent and cohesive outcome statement that would be your findings. So synthesizing the memos, because not everything you say in an analysis and the various questions you're asking will make it all the way through to your final chapter. You got a word count to think of, you got a structure, you got a narrative to create it, you've got to have a beginning, middle, and end. So yeah, I mean, these are stages and process, and it's always good to self-audit and to check you're being true to your participants, and then synthesizing those into something coherent and cohesive. Now, we have a summary table here. This is not strictly speaking necessary, but we have. We really want to show with this table that here's the 6 stages in the first column as recommended by Brown and Clarke. In the second column, you have the corresponding process for Brown and Clarke. So what they would recommend, which means that you're showing that, this isn't some kind of an NVivo analysis. This is a reflexive thematic analysis conducted in NVivo. So there should be a corresponding NVivo process for every Brown and Clarke process. The third column is just the strategic objective of going from the descriptive to the interpretive to the abstract. And the iterative process, is the bit that you will be using all the way through the other processes that would drive everything. And that's just, there is a full reference, I think, that we would just take this as an extract from a report we would have written. So that would be the first thing we would do in a real study, and that would guide and help the negotiations of the methodology with whoever you have to negotiate with. It would also give you a template against which you can work and then follow those steps all the way through your actual analysis. Now, you'll see down here, and you'll see in the previous video that we did, that we would have set up 6 folders in the coding area for the 6 stages of the process. And in this document, the second one we're going to show you today, this is the completed audit trail. So you can see it's more than a code book, although there's an element of a code book within it. So Brown and Clarke talk about one of the things you shouldn't do is produce a code book if you're doing thematic analysis. Yet, like phase 2 is called systematic data coding, so that part at least is absolutely consistent with coding, and therefore you could produce a code book for phase 2. And I know the point they're making. Your themes are not, Your codes don't morph into themes. This is something actively pursued in the data by the researcher. And so you're drawing inference and you're creating these themes based on reoccurrences of phenomena across your data in your interviews. However, I mentioned earlier that transparency can be an issue. And some of these issues are to do with coding, but some are just to do with organizing the codes as I collapse into, initial themes and then go through more processes of interpretation and coding and memoing and then finally arriving at my themes, which is what we've done in the previous video based on these. And in NVivo, there's a facility, which I don't think we explained well enough in the previous video, that let's say if I come straight down here to phase 5, we really decided, this is the standard tutorial, by the way, that comes shipped with NVivo. You'll have a copy of this yourself if you have NVivo. It's called Environmental Changes Down East. It's from a study some time ago in Duke University. It was a real study that's been built on as a tutorial since then. But we decided that there was, 4 real themes in this study. It was about community, it was about development, it was about the economy, and it was about the natural environment. Now, you see the codes underneath here? They would have been the initial themes identified, and then this is what's known as an aggregated parent code. You can just create a new code called community, switch on aggregation, and when you place the earlier stages of codes underneath here, they will feed up into the parent. So even at theme level, I can see, well, they talk more about the community than they do about development in those interviews. That's where the weighting of the data lies, and themes are themes based on reoccurrences. So they talk about the economy in pretty much equal measure with development, and they talk about the natural environment. So I can even see at these levels. So it is possible to actually show your themes, although they're extrapolated from interviews through a coding system, through interpretation, reading and rereading and noting and memoing. You can arrive at a situation where you have identified these things. You can simply create a framework and populate it from the original codes, which could go to more than one theme. They may not be necessarily exclusive. So that's in the previous video, and I don't think we explained a bit about aggregation codes quite as well in that video, so I just wanted to get that into this one. But you see the Audit Trail aligns perfectly with the processes here and with the guidelines, which we've just been showing you. So I'm just going to walk you through what that looks like. So these would be mostly appendices. So this is phase 1, familiarization and writing familiarization notes. And what we're showing you here is an annotation. Animated, like you could do with a PowerPoint or any app. There's a million ways you can animate an image nowadays. It's a screenshot taken of Barbara's interview and explaining the process here. Example of annotation to integrate contextual factors such as coding, assumptions, field notes and observations, researchers' thoughts and ideas during the initial reading and rereading and becoming familiar with the data. So you've evidence that you've done the work, but also that you understand the process and the philosophy behind why familiarization is such an important first step that shouldn't really be skipped. And you're not. Now, for each of these, this would be so in other words, if you imagine the structure of your methodology chapter, you're going to start out with your epistemological and ontological position, the philosophy, and then you're going to have, after that, you're going to have your, practical stuff like ethics and data collection instruments and whether the different instruments that you might have used, focus groups, interviews, whatever they are. Then you're going to reach a point where you're going to be describing, there'll be a section called data analysis. And that's where you would put in these bullet points, because these are appendices. They're not even going to add to your word count. But you would put in the bullet points here that explain and then link to this. So an audit trail, example of an annotation to integrate contextual factors, etc. And that goes in as a footnote here as well, but it also goes into the body, and then you would have Appendix 1, or whatever the number of the appendix is. And this is phase 2, systematic data coding. That's what it would look like in NVivo. It's no hierarchical structure. It's just deconstructing the data from its original chronology to an initial set of non-hierarchical codes. It's quite systematic. You do this meticulously. on the back of your familiarization. So you're already starting to generate and record your initial ideas through annotations and memos, but now you're also ordering these into these various domains. And you can see that it says here that 19 initial codes were identified at that stage of the process. Now, there's two ways you can produce this in terms of actually making this thing. You can right click here and you can do export. Sorry, you can right click here on the folder and do export codebook. Now, you can do all the phases like this, or you could just do the one I'm in now, and I can include or not the number of files and references. And that will immediately put the codebook, this part is certainly a codebook, into a Word document that looks like this. So you'll see it has all the codes, it has the descriptors where you have them, and it has the numbers of files and references if you want them. Some people's methods like to see like how much data these different files have drawn, how much it reoccurred across interviews. Some don't, it depends. But that's what it produces. I don't use this myself very much because the codes aren't collapsible. And you could customize that table and make it pretty. I tend to use Excel because it's more natural environment for customizing tables than Word is, although a lot of the function is now completely integrated between Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. But my problem with this isn't for phase one. It'd actually be fine for phase two. It would be absolutely fine for it because there is no hierarchy going on here. But if I did it for a different phase, what you'd see is that there'd be no hierarchy there either. I would just see the codes, and then the child codes would be slightly indented. So if I did it here for, let's say, for phase 4, I'd get a different picture. I'm just going to export the codebook. I'll include the number of files and references, but as I said, you don't have to. And I'll get another document now. But you'll see that the issue is that in phase 4, I might just want to show what I'm showing here in NVivo, which is the outcome of the previous phases and these developing and reviewing my themes. Now you see it does indent the subcode. So, community attitudes, mixed, negative, neutral, and positive are all subcodes under community attitudes. And they all come under the broader heading of community. And you'll get your descriptors, including typos, and you'll get your number of interviews and the number of references. And this one was done in Excel rather than, now you can simply, another option, right, and this is the way I do it, but you don't have to, is you can right click here and do export list. That's going to give you a list directly into Excel. So I'm going to put on the desktop, which will be identical to this in all, whatever way you have it set up. If you have your descriptors on display, it'll be identical to list view in NVivo, but it will look a bit different. It's going to look, I'll just open it up here, like, what did I do there, phase 4. I just want to show you what it looks like. It's going to look like this. Because when you dump into Excel as opposed to Word, you see there's 3 strata of codes here. Themes, sub-themes. I know that's not a term that's that popular with Brown and Clarke, but themes and the structure that's behind them. And that's the exact same thing you've just been looking at there. But unlike Word, these are collapsible. If I just wanted to show my top level ones and the data behind them, then it shows it. If I want to show just my first and second level ones, I click on the little 2 here. That's going to give me first and second level codes. I've kind of a bit more freedom because you can apply cell styles up here. I can just apply a style to a cell and it's going to look exactly like that. The text will be that color and everything else. So I can, demarcate the reviewing themes from the elements that I'm putting underneath and that I'm keeping in or out. So that's why I use Excel. It just gives you more freedom in terms of what this thing looks like and less customization to have to do on it. So that's what phase 2 looks like, and that's what it looks like in the audit trail. Now we go down to phase 3, and this is, sorry, where am I going to? phase 3 is generating initial themes from coded and collated data, but I've just shown you phase 2. So these would be some initial themes. So of the I think it was 19 codes generated initially, 9 initial themes were developed through the reading and rereading of these. So we now have a broader structure at phase 3. So there's our 9 themes, and you can see we're just showing the top level ones. There is data behind them, as you can see, but we're just showing the top level ones because they're let's keep this easy to follow, easy to understand. You saw the phase 2 codes. Now you can see phase 3, and you can see the structure and hierarchy is there, but the data is there as well. And these are the 9 themes that were identified from the 19 initial codes. They're initial themes. They're not full-blown themes yet, as Braun and Clarke would describe them, but it's an organizational task that has allowed us to view the data in this way. Then we move on to phase 4, which would be developing and reviewing. That can involve some more refined coding, breaking some of these codes down. If, let's say, within community attitudes, you decide, well, actually, there's more to this than just the attitudes. They're different. We have positive, negative, we have neutral, with different levels of emotional responses from people when it comes to the community, and different elements within the community, like development and jobs, tourism, building on the beautiful environment, environmental impacts, all of those. So they often need to be broken down and be more refined. But we're showing here that the 9 initial themes were reduced to 8. Now, Braun and Clarke do talk a lot about their own experience as academics would be that some students find it difficult to let go of a theme. And I would have that experience as well from working with people, on this side of the house. But anyway, one is let go here. The others are reorganized, reviewed, and refined as necessary. So that's phase 4, refining and reviewing. So we're gone from 9 to 8. And then we go to phase 5, which now looks like this. We're refining, defining, and naming our themes. Now that means so the 9 go down to 4. Some of them are collapsed within it. And you'll see if I go to the Audit Trail here that you can now see community now has the 3 elements of community, the broader themes that the community are talking about. That's refining, defining, and naming the themes. So we're down to 4, and that's the different elements within them. Again, done in Excel just because it's easier to make it a bit more visual, a little bit easier to see and to manage. So that's phase 5. Now, what we're trying to show here in this appendix, which strictly speaking isn't necessary, this is a tool in NVivo called the Mapper. And this is a concept map, which really just shows, for someone who's never been involved in this, that there are, like, taking one of the themes, which is the environmental changes. Take within that then community, the economy, and industry as 3 important areas that people talk about. And there's your initial codes that people would have. So we're saying is these 2 codes inform the community. Community in turn brings you to environmental changes down east. And these 4 down here transcend pretty much all of them. So we were saying earlier that codes don't always map nicely to themes, and that's really what Braun and Clarke are getting at when they talk about your themes are not just a reflection of your interview schedule or your initial codes. But they're kind of transcending, so they're kind of sitting out there, but they're informed by the environmental changes down east, local identity, local connections, etc. And that's just put in there. We've left that completed in the project file that we have here, and we have separate videos on using 3 different types of conceptual mapping that are possible in NVivo: mind maps, project map, and concept map. That particular one is a concept map. So this will be down here in the visualizations area. We have a separate video as well called Visualize Your Data with NVivo, which is a whole other hour webinar we did for the developers of Lumivero. But this is purpose coding, complexity of views. I think it's this one here. We've a few of these done just as examples in there for you. That's not it. I'm not sure. No, I'll just test through a few of these. Just that's a conceptual map. Oh, yeah, there's the flowchart. That's the one there. So that's the one we've just been showing you. So these are quite easy to use. Technically, you can drag the shapes in, you can link them up, and you can inform them. You don't, they only take a few minutes to construct what I have there. Okay, so back to our audit trail. I'm going to just close those open items. I kind of goofed off a little bit there. The next one, whoops, didn't mean to do that either. Sorry, I should go back and open that again. The next one is, that was the flowchart example. This is the example of conceptual mapping, which is not like the flowchart, which is simply showing which themes and sub-themes are informing each other, and a history of that thought processes. And it's thought progression you're trying to show in an audit trail. So it's not necessarily just about a code book. But this one is the one I showed you a minute ago. Again, this is saved in here. You can download the project file. By the way, this is version 14 for Windows. The Mac would look pretty similar, and we're going to put it up in Windows and Mac on our server, so you can request a link and download them for either. But it is version 14 because we always use the latest version in these videos, and it's not, NVivo is not backward compatible, so you wouldn't be able to open this in version 12 or version 2020 or R1, but you can open it in any 14. You can always register for a trial there's a 14-day free trial if you want to just open this and play with it and see what it looks like. The interface would look very similar to the previous version in Vivo 2020, sometimes referred to as R1, but that there are some differences between them as well. And then finally, writing the report. And that's that process we described earlier, where you would systematically go through your themes and write them, and write summaries, and ask these various different kinds of questions of the data. I'm just going to, let me kick that up a bit into the full. You could undock any item in NVivo and it'll just open up in its own window. It gives you a little bit more room to see what's going on. So one of the things so there's a summary of the various elements within the community change. This is what they really talk about. I should go a small bit bigger. So community shifts, patterns, economic changes. They would be your lower level codes that would be informing up the line. But one of the things that noticed was that one of those 5 questions we talked about in that memo that you would be asking of the data is really things like voice representation. Now, that's one of the visualizations I referred to in that video. We will put a link in the descriptor for the shortcuts to different parts of this video, but also the previous ones I'm referring to that we've already done that might inform, because if we were to go through the process of showing you how to do all of these, we'd be here for hours, probably a 1 or 2 day course. But they're not rocket science either, and those videos will be concise enough to show you the steps. You could always ping an email to me as well. I'll put the email address in the final video when it goes up, so you can ping me an email and request any of those things. This is the representation of older people. If I just get that up a little bit bigger, it's quite hard to see because this is just not the original PDF. It's imported. But what you see here is that the discussion about community change is dominated by the older members of the participant group. But that's not representative of the study population. They're actually quite one of the smallest groups down here in the second one, which is linking that back to the study population. So you can say hand on heart, this isn't trying to be statistically valid or trying to be anything. Sometimes people get their backs up if they see a graph. I would say it's a visual representation of inductively coded and perfectly following a set of phenomenological processes. You do want to give people a voice, and clearly where one group places a higher emphasis on something over another, it's worth noting. Or you might decide I'll put it in my memo. Maybe it won't make it in all the way into my final memo, my final chapter, because my last process will be to synthesize these memos. But I'm certainly recording it now as part of my analysis as I'm writing my memo, and the fact that when you look at the representation in community change, and then you see how that pairs up against the actual study population, a much smaller group are much more concerned than the rest. That's the only point that's really trying to make. I'm going to redoc that again. Hopefully it'll be, if you download the video or the project file, you'll be able to see it clearly. It just won't. It's a PDF and it's blown up on the screen here. It just doesn't read well on video, So that's phase 6. That's elements of the process of analysis and write-up and the kind of questions you're asking of the data. And that's an audit trail. And it gives you clearly a much more... first of all, we can make 2 statements to the academy, to the reviewer, to whoever it is we're trying to show our workings to. We can make 2 statements. That's really the only point of an audit trail. The first one is I did the work. I didn't just say I did it. Here's the evidence, here's the processes, and how they align with the recommendations from the literature. And 2, I did it in a manner consistent with those guidelines. So I didn't just goof off, produce a set of themes with posters on the wall or stickies and saying that's my themes. There's some evidence of actual data behind these and of how you engage the data and produced it. So I know that I think it was the book or one of the papers where Brown and Clarke talk about bullshit bingo, and one of the things they have in there is a code book. But I would say, yes, there's an element of, certainly for phase 2, there's an element of a code book in here, but it's much more than that. It's a clear audit trail. And one of the advantages of using a tool like NVivo is efficiency, but mostly transparency. So that's how you would produce an audit trail. Now, I will put links into the video of the other videos I referred to in this video. I'll put them into the descriptor along with some summaries and where you find things in this video. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, ping them to the email address and we'll certainly answer them for you or refer you to other resources or videos that might help. So thank you for watching. Take care.